The moment I saw the old sedan parked under the flickering street lamp, my heart clenched in a way I hadn't felt in years. I had been searching for my son Arv for months, making endless calls and sending messages that went unanswered, each day of silence twisting a knife deeper into my chest, and now, seeing him slouched on the cold curb, wrapped in a threadbare blanket, I felt both shock and an unbearable ache that left me momentarily breathless, the sight of my grandsons peeking cautiously from the car windows, clutching their worn-out stuffed toys, added a sharp pang of sorrow, their tiny faces pale and anxious, a silent reflection of the life they had been forced to endure. And my mind immediately went back to the day Arif had married Priya, a woman everyone had admired for her charm and grace, the kind of woman who seemed almost unreal in her perfection. And I had welcomed her with open arms, convinced she would bring happiness into our family, yet here he was, reduced to this, and I realized how completely I had been blind to the storm brewing behind closed doors, how naive I had been to trust appearances. I knelt beside him, my hand resting on his shoulder, and he tried to smile. A weak, faltering gesture that didn't reach his eyes, and I could see the shame and exhaustion etched into every line of his face, and though he stammered, "Mom, it's not what you think," I already sensed the betrayal hidden in those words, the depth of deception that had shattered his life and ours. As he began to speak, the fragments of truth emerged slowly, like shards of glass piercing my heart. Priya, the woman we had trusted, had manipulated him from the start, isolating him from family, draining his savings, twisting his world into something unrecognizable, and now, he and the boys had nowhere to go, living in fear and uncertainty, clinging to each other in the car that had become their refuge, their fragile sanctuary against a cruel world. The anger surged within me, hot and sharp, mingling with my sorrow, for no mother should see her child and grandchildren abandoned, no parent should feel so powerless against the betrayal of someone once considered family. And yet I knew that beneath the despair, beneath the exhaustion and the tears, there was a fire that would not be extinguished, a determination to protect, to fight, to reclaim what had been stolen. And as I wrapped my arms around my grandsons, whispering promises of safety and love, I felt that surge of resolve solidify into something unbreakable. I would not let this injustice stand. I would uncover every lie, confront every deception, and rebuild what had been torn apart, for Arif, for the boys, for the family that had been nearly destroyed. And in that moment, sitting on the cold curb with the night pressing in around us, I understood that this was the beginning not just of our recovery, but of a reckoning, a slow, deliberate path toward justice, healing, and ultimately redemption. It took weeks of patient coaxing and quiet nights for Arif to begin revealing the depths of Priya's betrayal, each word cutting through me like ice. A story of manipulation and deceit that made my blood boil and my heart ache simultaneously, for I realized that the woman we had welcomed so wholeheartedly had systematically dismantled my son's life from the very beginning, isolating him from family, convincing him that we were the problem, draining his bank accounts, coercing him into decisions that left him vulnerable, and all the while smiling with the perfection of a carefully crafted facade that hid her true intentions. And as Arv's voice trembled and faltered, he admitted the most painful truth. He had stayed silent to protect the boys, to shield their innocence from the reality that their mother, the person meant to love and care for them, had abandoned them emotionally and financially, leaving them living in fear and uncertainty, clinging to each other in the cramped backseat of that car as if it were a fortress, a small and fragile bubble against the cruelty of a world their mother had turned against them. And as I listened, rage and sorrow collided within me, a storm of emotions that made me feel both helpless and resolutely determined, for no mother, no grandmother, should ever see the faces of her children and grandchildren haunted by fear and betrayal. And in those long nights I held them close, whispering promises of protection and love, feeling the boys' small bodies tremble as they tried to comprehend the chaos around them, while simultaneously feeling Arv's guilt and shame, knowing that he had believed he could navigate this alone. And now, finally, we could begin the work of understanding, of piecing together the reality Priya had tried so hard to hide. And with each revelation I felt a fierce resolve grow within me, a determination not just to comfort and rebuild, but to ensure that justice would be served, that Priya would face the consequences of her actions and recognize the devastation she had caused. And I began quietly collecting evidence, documenting every lie, every transaction, every manipulated conversation, each piece a step toward exposing the truth, while simultaneously nurturing the family that remained, rebuilding their confidence and sense of safety. And as Arv began to reclaim some strength, some hope, I felt a transformation within myself as well, realizing that anger and heartbreak could fuel not only revenge but a protective love that would never waver, a commitment to guide them through the storm she had created. And in those moments, sitting together in our small temporary home, watching the boys tentatively play and Arv cautiously smile, I understood that the journey ahead would require patience, cunning, and unyielding determination, for Priya's deception had been calculated, and so too must be our response, not born of cruelty, but of justice, of a mother's and grandmother's fierce love. And in the quiet darkness of that rebuilding, I whispered silently to myself that one day, the truth would shine, and those who had caused such pain would have no choice but to face the consequences, while the family we preserved would emerge stronger, wiser, and unbroken. And that thought, small but steady, became a guiding light in the midst of our suffering. Revenge, I realized, required patience, precision, and a careful plan, for it was not enough to confront Priya with anger. Her downfall had to be inevitable, undeniable, and crafted in a way that would strip her of every illusion of control she had ever held. And so I began quietly gathering evidence, meticulously collecting bank statements, messages, photos, and any hint of the lies and manipulations she had woven around Arif, each piece a weapon of truth that would expose her for the person she truly was, while simultaneously rebuilding the fragile lives of my son and grandsons, creating a safe and nurturing environment where laughter could echo once again, where the boys could play without fear, and where Arv could regain his strength and confidence. And as the days turned into weeks, I watched the subtle transformation in him, a man once broken now slowly standing taller, his eyes regaining a glimmer of hope, his voice no longer faltering with shame but carrying the beginnings of determination. And yet my mind never strayed far from the ultimate goal, for Priya's arrogance and deceit could not be allowed to go unpunished. And the opportunity presented itself when she began flaunting her new life on social media, her expensive cars, lavish parties, and ostentatious displays of wealth, creating the perfect stage for her own undoing. And I used every piece of evidence I had collected to construct a carefully orchestrated confrontation, not just legally but socially, ensuring that those who had once admired her charm and sophistication would now see the truth, the depth of betrayal she had inflicted upon the man I loved and the children who deserved nothing but safety and love. And when the first notifications of her exposure began to appear, I saw the subtle shift in her demeanor, the hesitation, the faltering confidence, the cracks in the perfect facade she had maintained for so long. And as she realized the world now knew her lies, the power she had wielded so effortlessly evaporated, leaving only fear and desperation. And though part of me wanted to relish her panic, I focused instead on ensuring that Arv reclaimed everything that was rightfully his finances, his dignity, and most importantly, the trust of his children, for revenge was not about cruelty but justice, a restoration of balance and protection of those who had suffered. And as I watched Priya stumble, trying to salvage what remained of her reputation, I felt a bittersweet satisfaction, a quiet triumph tempered by the knowledge that we had survived her manipulations and that my son and grandsons were finally safe. And in the nights that followed, as Arif tucked the boys into bed, their laughter mingling with ours, I realized that the sweetest revenge was not simply seeing her exposed but witnessing the healing of our family, the restoration of trust, and the reclamation of a life that Priya had attempted to destroy. And in that quiet victory, I understood that no betrayal, however deep, could overpower the bonds of love and resilience we had nurtured, and that while the memory of her deceit would linger, it would serve as a reminder of our strength, our unity, and the lengths a mother and grandmother would go to protect what mattered most. And in that knowledge, I found not only satisfaction but a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that our family, though scarred, had emerged stronger, wiser, and more united than ever, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, with the certainty that truth and justice would always prevail in the end. Months passed, and with each passing day, the scars of betrayal began to fade, leaving space for healing, for laughter, and for the quiet restoration of a life that had once been fractured beyond recognition. And as I watched Arv gradually regain his confidence, the weight of shame and fear lifting from his shoulders, I felt a profound sense of relief, for the man who had once slouched in despair beside a cold car now stood taller, his eyes carrying a glimmer of hope and determination that had been absent for far too long, while my grandsons, once timid and wary, now ran through the house with laughter spilling from their lips, their innocence slowly returning as they discovered the simple joys of being children again, free from the shadows of fear their mother had cast over them. And in those moments, as I tucked them into bed, hearing their whispered goodnights and feeling the soft rise and fall of their chests, I realized that the true victory of our struggle was not in the downfall of Priya, though her reckoning had been necessary and sweet, but in the reclamation of life, love, and trust within our family, for the bonds that had been strained by deceit were now strengthened by resilience, by shared trials, and by the unwavering determination of a mother and grandmother unwilling to allow destruction to prevail, and Arif, sitting quietly beside me, finally allowed himself to voice the gratitude he had carried silently for so long, his words simple yet laden with emotion. "Mom, I don't know what I would have done without you," and in that instant, the depth of our shared struggle crystallized, the months of fear, anger, and careful planning culminating in a sense of peace that had seemed impossible when we first found ourselves huddled in that car. And as I looked at him, at the boys, and at the life we were rebuilding together, I understood that the sweetest revenge had never been about seeing Priya falter or suffer, but about restoring the dignity, safety, and happiness of the ones I loved most, about creating a future where deceit could not penetrate, where love and trust formed the foundation of every day. And as the nights passed, filled with the comforting rhythms of our new life, I felt a quiet pride in the way we had endured, in the way Arif had risen from despair, in the way the boys had found their laughter again, and I knew that the lessons of betrayal, while painful, had forged within us a strength and wisdom that no deception could ever undo. And though the memory of Priya's lies lingered like a shadow at the edge of our lives, it served only as a reminder of our resilience, our vigilance, and the lengths to which love would go to protect what was sacred. And in that knowledge, I felt a serenity I had not thought possible, a sense of closure not just for the battles fought but for the healing achieved. And as I finally allowed myself to breathe fully, to embrace the present without fear of past betrayals, I realized that our family, though scarred and tested, had emerged stronger, united, and unbreakable, capable of facing whatever future awaited us with courage, with love, and with the unwavering certainty that together we could overcome anything. And in that quiet, profound victory, I found not only peace but a lasting hope, a promise that our lives, rebuilt from the ashes of deceit, would continue to thrive, bound by loyalty, trust, and the enduring power of family.